According to Rand Paul, Fauci's days are numbered, and we all know that pardon was completely illegal. You can't give a pardon, Biden. You can't give somebody a pardon when you don't even know what the crime is. That's not how these things work. These things need to be challenged in court. The DOJ needs to go after these guys. Congress needs to go after these guys. They need to do their job, right? Rand Paul's the only one really standing up for this, continuing on the fight against Fauci and his little power-hungry extravaganza that took place a couple of years ago. So, as it says here, this is a big deal that Dr. Fauci kept this hidden from the public. Senator Rand Paul explains the subpoena on Dr. Fauci about the COVID-19 origins. Now, let's remember what Rand Paul said recently, which was that he had been talking to Fauci's lawyers and they had tried to make some agreements, and then at the last minute, Fauci backed out. You know, on the channel, you've seen probably another video where Fauci's hands are shaking. And another instance when Rand Paul was interviewing him because he's just infuriated. Well, we're a little bit infuriated with Fauci and his degeneracy going all the way back to the 80s and the other pandemics that took place down there or back then. You guys can look that up if you want to know. I'm not trying to get banned on one of these social networks just yet. But let's watch this video from Newsmax.
Kentucky Republican and chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Senator Rand Paul joins me. Nice to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Senator, what do you want to ask Dr. Fauci?
Well, you know, we've been through 2 million bits of information that was kept hidden from us from the Biden administration, but Secretary Kennedy and the Trump administration have been very forthcoming. We've looked at a lot of exchanges, a lot of communications, and we now have evidence that not only did Dr. Fauci lie about funding gain-of-function research in China, he also asked others to destroy records. He destroyed federal records himself.
That's the crime that should have gotten Fauci and Hillary Clinton put in prison, right? Destruction of records in order to try to save their asses. Completely inappropriate.
And this is also a felony. We need to ask him about that. We also have questions about the pardon. No venue has asked him any questions about the pardon. We need to know, did he engage the pardons? What crime did he think that he needed protection from? And so there's quite a few questions that we have to ask. We had wanted him to come in voluntarily. He had initially agreed, but then last week or about 2 weeks ago, decided that he would not come in unless he was subpoenaed.
Is this an open hearing or?
Basically, he wussed out, didn't he? He knows he can't stand up for himself. He knows he can't come up there and tell the truth. He knows he's lied before. He knows he's committed felonies. He knows he's burned the evidence of those felonies. But, you know, the internet is forever, and we have quite a lot of data from all around the world from these biolabs in Ukraine, China, and elsewhere that were used to engage in gain-of-function research.
Will this be a deposition behind closed doors?
This will be a public hearing, and there'll be both Republicans and Democrats there. He'll be given a chance to make an opening statement, and then he'll be questioned. But there are some real legitimate questions. I mean, what kind of scientist decides to fund research in a totalitarian country, gain-of-function research, where you take two viruses, you combine them to make a virus not known in nature, and then try to infect human cells with it? There's a great deal of evidence. The CIA now concludes, the Department of Energy concludes, and the FBI all conclude that the evidence points towards this coming from a lab. And yet,
did you hear that? I mean, our entire government apparatus agrees that this is the case. Yeah, we can't get anything done because the DOJ needs to prosecute these people.
Yet Fauci for years has been saying, oh, no, it came from a marketplace. Well, we discovered emails where in January of 2020, he actually knew that the first people that got this disease were not at the marketplace, but actually pre-existed the marketplace. That the marketplace.
January 2020, right? That's like 3 months before they really started pushing the Wuhan virus. I mean, I think everyone by March was convinced that it came from the Wuhan area. I mean, some of us were a little more, some of us avid news watchers may have had some different beliefs, but generally that was the narrative being pushed across the country and across the West and across the world, that it was from this market, but we all found out later that wasn't the case at all.
Place was a spreader event, but it was not the origin. And this is a big deal that he kept this hidden from the public. It is a big deal that he also did give an $8 million grant to a couple of scientists who privately were saying, oh, it looks like it was manipulated in a lab, looks like a lab leak. But then publicly they said the opposite once they received an $8 million grant from Anthony Fauci. So he has a lot to explain.
All right, I did not know or think that the coronavirus was a gain-of-function virus. I thought that was a separate virus. Am I wrong on that? Was coronavirus a created gain-of-function virus?
Gain-of-function just describes a type of experiment where what happens is you take one known virus and maybe one unknown virus, you take parts of them, put them together, and then grow them in human cells to see if they gain in function. Anthony Fauci has argued, well, if you don't know in advance they're going to gain a function, then you can't really call it gain of function. But they did know, and they continue to do these experiments in Wuhan, even when the evidence from the experiments was showing that it was gaining in function. We also know that animal viruses don't infect humans very well. When they first make the jump to humans, they don't go human to human very well. COVID, the moment it took off, the moment humans were infected with this virus, it infected humans better than any animals. This indicates a virus that has been pre-adapted for humans. It's a great part of the evidence is that this virus went human to human with no problems immediately, and the whole world became so infected because it was a virus that had been pre-adapted in the lab to be more infectious to human. That is the gain of function.
Well, if you go back to January 14, 2020, WHO tweeted, I'll never forget.
Gain of function sounds complicated, but it really just means that human beings altered something to make it do more than it did previously. In this case, to more easily infect human beings. That's what they tested it to do.
This tweet, it said that according to the Chinese, that COVID was not transmittable from human to human, which of course turned out not to be true. Was the spread of this COVID virus, was it an accidental or a deliberate spread? I mean, when it originated wherever, out of the lab.
Yeah, I think most likely accidental. I can't tell you with certainty, but I would say most likely accidental, because if a country wanted to create something as a weapon, they'd be unlikely to release it in their own country. Wuhan's a city of 15 million people. We're not sure it's advisable to get viruses 8 hours away, 300 feet underground in a bat cave and take them back to a city of 15 million people. We also think the lab was not up to snuff. It was a BSL-2 lab for much of this and not a BSL-4 lab, which is the higher rating. So there's a lot of reasons why this shouldn't have been done.
You really can't expect anyone to follow any proper regulations in China. If anyone's seen the tofu drag in China, the buildings that they make out of rebar that you can, or fake rebar that you can break with your hands, they have famously have filled cement full of sand and had buildings collapse. Schools collapse in China over the past few decades, like numerous times. No one should expect that they're going to follow the highest levels of security in China. Unfortunately, the highest levels of safety is a non-starter. Safety itself is almost a non-starter in a communist country because there just isn't a concern for individual liberty and the value of people. So we shouldn't be there, which is exactly why the U.S. government, that knows it can't engage in these sort of nefarious activities, the deep state knows it can't engage in these nefarious activities within our borders, keeps opening these labs in other countries and paying these people tons of money to develop these things. This is where our tax dollars are going. This is where our tax dollars are going, right? We can't afford anything. We're $39 trillion in debt, massive amounts of inflation, devalues the dollar, devalues our wages every year, and it's because we're spending money on ludicrous things like this.
And that mistakes were made, but ultimately we think what happened is they were trying to create a vaccine, possibly with a new virus that they had created, a live virus, but then that virus got out and infected lab workers. Intelligence reports from 2019 have 3 people in Dr. Xi's lab getting sick. They actually know the names. They published the names of the 3 scientists who got sick in November of 2019. The Chinese still deny this, But the Chinese also say, oh, well, COVID-19 was never in our lab. We don't have any samples that match it. But that would be, you'd have to trust the Chinese to be honest about this. And if it came out of China, I think there's no way in the world they would be honest or that their government would let them live. We know that the one scientist who did create the vaccine mysteriously died falling from a tall building in Beijing in
That's not random. We know what that means.
April of 2020.
Is there, the first time I heard gain of function was years ago when President Obama put a moratorium on gain of function research or testing. Then I didn't know what happened to it until all of a sudden COVID. Then I started to learn a whole lot more. Is there a legitimate reason to do gain of function research? I get it that doing it in a communist country isn't too smart, but is there a legitimate reason to do gain of function research?
I don't think there is. There's been some controversy over this. Anthony Fauci wrote in an op-ed in 2011 that even if a pandemic should occur from gain of function research, that the knowledge is worth the risk. Many scientists don't think the knowledge is worth the risk. We've never created a vaccine from gain of function research. They've done things like take the avian flu, which doesn't go human to human well or at all, and they've put in 8 mutations to make it transmissible not only human to human, but through the air. So this is something that, you know, the purpose, it's sort of like being Dr. Frankenstein and doing these kind of things. There is no good purpose for this. It's incredibly dangerous. And the purpose is to take an animal virus and try to make it more infectious to humans. It's a death wish, but it's not a death wish for a handful of people. It could be the death wish for the entire planet. We have things like Ebola that aren't readily transmitted by aerosol. If you change it and mutate it on purpose to make it aerosolized, if Ebola were aerosolized, you would risk 50% of the planet dying. As bad as COVID was, it was 1% of the American population. 50%, you would have people dying by the tens of thousands just from lack of doctors, lack of sanitation, lack of clean water. I mean, you would devastate the planet. So we shouldn't be doing these experiments.
Well, I've always been more afraid of gain of function and viruses, and I have a ballistic missile because you can see the ballistic missile coming at least, and not so with the virus. Anyway, Senator Rand Paul, thank you, sir.